She identified herself as a federal judge, and they still put her in handcuffs. That line comes directly from a civil complaint filed months after the incident. An incident that started as a quiet evening outside a private home and ended with multiple officers losing their careers and one facing a 15-year federal sentence. Body cam footage reportedly captured an officer saying, "I don't care who you are, step away from the vehicle now," as neighbors watched in disbelief. A federal judge in her own driveway, surrounded by police. So the question is, how does something like that even happen? And more importantly, where did it go so wrong? Before we go anywhere further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The central figure in this case is Judge Alana Brooks, a longtime federal district judge in her late 50s. Known for her calm, methodical approach in the courtroom, she had built a reputation over decades for enforcing constitutional protections and holding both prosecutors and law enforcement to a high standard. On the night in question, she had just returned home after an evening event. It was late, quiet, and uneventful, until she noticed something unusual. A vehicle she didn't recognize was parked near her driveway, engine running, lights off. Concerned, but not alarmed, she stepped outside to get a better look. From her perspective, this was simple: someone unfamiliar sitting near her home at night. What she didn't know was that the individuals inside that vehicle were plainclothes officers conducting surveillance tied to an unrelated investigation. And within minutes, that misunderstanding would spiral into something far more serious. The body cam footage begins with tension already in the air. "Ma'am, step back from the vehicle." Judge Brooks responds calmly, "This is my home. Why are you parked here?" The officer doesn't explain. "We're conducting official business. Step back." At first, it's controlled, direct, but there's confusion on both sides. She asks a reasonable question. "If you're law enforcement, identify yourselves." The response is immediate and dismissive. "We don't need to show you anything right now." That's where things start to shift. A second officer exits the vehicle. The tone hardens. "Ma'am, you are interfering with an active investigation." "I'm standing on my property. I'm asking who you are." There's a pause, a moment where this could go either way. Then she identifies herself. "I'm a federal judge. I expect you to act accordingly." But instead of slowing things down, it speeds everything up. "Turn around, put your hands behind your back." There's disbelief in her voice. "You cannot be serious." Within seconds, officers move in. Her hands are pulled behind her back, handcuffs are applied. Neighbors begin to step outside. Phones come out. Someone starts recording. And just like that, a routine misunderstanding becomes a full-scale incident. Now, this is important. At this point, the legal question becomes, what authority did the officers actually have? Generally, police are allowed to conduct surveillance in public spaces, even in residential areas. They don't necessarily have to explain their presence to every person who asks. But when a homeowner approaches individuals near their property, especially at night, the situation changes. A person standing on their own property has the right to ask questions. That alone is not a crime. Officers may argue that interference with an investigation justifies commands like "step back" or "leave the area." But legally, that depends on behavior. Was she physically interfering? Was she blocking access? Was she preventing them from doing their job? Or was she simply asking questions? Because under the law, those are very different scenarios. And based on what's been described, there was no clear indication that she crossed into actual obstruction before the situation escalated. But here's where things changed even further. After she was detained, officers reportedly turned their attention to her vehicle, parked in her own driveway. "Do you have a warrant?" she asks. "We're conducting a lawful search," an officer replies. "On what basis?" There's no clear answer on camera. She remains in handcuffs for several minutes. The situation feels unstable, uncertain. Neighbors begin to speak up.
"That's Judge Brooks," someone says. "You've got the wrong person." Another officer arrives on scene. You can hear the shift in tone. "Wait, is that who I think is?" There's hesitation now, a pause. But by this point, the damage is already done. She's placed in the back of a patrol vehicle. And for a moment, no one seems fully in control. Now, let's break this down further. The second major legal issue here involves search and detention. Searching a vehicle without a warrant generally requires probable cause, something concrete that suggests evidence of a crime may be present. There are exceptions like consent or urgent circumstances, but those are limited. From what's publicly known, there was no immediate threat, no visible evidence, no clear connection between her vehicle and the investigation. So the question becomes, what justified that search? Then there's the detention itself. Even if officers believed she was interfering, the level of force used must be reasonable. Courts often look at whether the person posed a threat, whether they were resisting, and whether the situation required immediate control. Because even when officers have legal authority, how they use that authority still matters. And this is where discretion becomes critical. Discretion allows officers to make judgment calls in the moment. But when those decisions go too far or ignore obvious context, that same discretion can become the foundation for liability. The aftermath was swift and severe. Within days, body cam footage was requested. Internal investigations were launched. Judge Brooks filed a formal complaint, followed by a federal civil rights lawsuit alleging unlawful detention, violation of constitutional protections, and abuse of authority. At first, the department defended the officers, stating they were operating within the scope of an active investigation. But as more details emerged and as footage was reviewed, that position began to weaken. Several officers were placed on administrative leave. The primary officer involved, the one who made the call to detain and escalate, was later charged in federal court with violating civil rights under color of law. Prosecutors argued that the actions taken were not just mistakes, but knowingly unlawful decisions that crossed constitutional lines. The case moved forward. Evidence was presented, body cam footage analyzed, testimony heard, and the outcome was clear: a conviction. The officer was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Other officers involved faced termination or chose to resign. The department issued a public statement acknowledging what they described as serious errors in judgment, and the footage spread nationwide, becoming a case study in how quickly things can go wrong. So let's break this down clearly. Did the officers have a legitimate reason to be in the area? Yes, they were conducting surveillance tied to another case. Did they have the authority to issue commands? Possibly, if they believed their operation was at risk. But here's the key issue. Did they handle the situation appropriately once confusion became obvious? That's where the case falls apart. Because even if Judge Brooks had never identified herself, the facts still matter. She was on her property. She was asking questions. There was no immediate threat. And once it became clear that this was a misunderstanding, the situation should have de-escalated. Instead, it escalated. Did the officer have legal authority? Maybe. But having authority does not automatically mean the decision was wise, ethical, or necessary. And that's what this case ultimately highlights. A moment where patience, communication, and basic judgment could have resolved everything peacefully, but instead led to handcuffs, a lawsuit, destroyed careers, and a 15-year sentence. So what should people take away from this? First, situations like this can escalate quickly even when no one expects them to. Second, your rights don't disappear just because law enforcement is present, but how those rights are exercised matters. Remaining calm can make a difference. Asking clear, simple questions can help establish what's happening. If things go too far, documenting the situation, safely and legally, can become critical later. And if you're ever questioned or detained, asking for legal representation is a step many people choose to take. Because the reality is this: the roadside is not where legal battles are won. Those battles are decided later, through evidence, process, and accountability. And sometimes the consequences for getting it wrong are life-changing. Do you think this was lawful police work under pressure, or did this officer take a routine situation way too far?